Phone check. 1, 2. The microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2. The microphone check. I got my headphones tuned between two different AM stations, and my briefcase is full of declassified information. Declassified. Declassified.
Good evening and welcome to News from Neptune for the 34th week of 2014. For more than 20 years, this program has been a spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion of the news of the week and its coverage by the media. First on a so-called community radio station, and when censored and locked out of there, welcomed, I'm happy to say, by the good folks at Urbana Public Television, which has recently won awards, national awards. Congratulations to our friends here at UPTV. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight are Karen Aram and David Green. Our program's name, News from Neptune, was chosen to honor Noam Chomsky, who has been talking sense about American politics for more than twice the quarter century we have been on the air. Chomsky has said in the American media, either to repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true and it will sound like it's from Neptune. Our format is to take turns suggesting stories that have been ignored or misreported, sometimes even innocently, by the national media, and then having our colleagues comment on them. Previous programs are archived on YouTube and posted to the Facebook page of News from Neptune, where you'll also find comments from viewers, not all unadulterated praise, and some answers from us. I also can be reached at carl@newsfromneptune.com, and I'm happy to receive your comments. Today is August 22nd, 2014. I want to read a bit of Kenneth Rexroth's poem entitled August 22nd, 1939, written on the anniversary of the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti, anarchists who were electrocuted in Boston in 1927. Nicola Sacco, who was born in 1891, and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, born in 1888, were Italian-born anarchists who were convicted of murdering two men during their armed robbery of a shoe factory in Braintree, Massachusetts in 1920. A controversial trial in 1921 resulted in the men's convictions, despite equivocal ballistics evidence and numerous witnesses who claimed Sacco had been in Boston's North End and Vanzetti in Plymouth, Massachusetts on the day of the robbery. Both defendants had to recount their anarchist beliefs on the witness stand in order to explain why they had been found armed when arrested. By 1925, the case had drawn literally worldwide attention, one of the largest causes célèbres in modern history. They were executed, Sacco and Vanzetti, in the electric chair in 1927, and riots destroyed property in Paris, London, and other European capitals because of the international acclaim of this well-known miscarriage of justice. The notion was, and it was probably quite true, that they were executed more for their anarchist beliefs in that post-World War I period of reaction than for their actual participation in the crime. In 1977, Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis issued a proclamation that Sacco and Vanzetti had been unfairly tried and convicted, and that, quote, any disgrace should be forever removed from their names. That was, of course, 50 years too late. Kenneth Rexroth's poem, August 22nd, 1939, begins with a letter from Nicola Sacco to his son Dante, who was then about 13, written 4 days before Sacco was executed. He wrote, and then Rexroth included this as the beginning of his poem. Sacco wrote, when you want to distract your mother from the discouraging soulness, I will tell you what I used to do. To take her for a long walk in the quiet country, gathering wildflowers here and there, resting under the shade of trees, between the harmony of the vivid stream and the tranquility of the Mother Nature, and I'm sure she will enjoy this very much, as you surely will be happy for it. But remember always, Dante, in the play of happiness, don't use all for yourself only, but down yourself just one step at your side and help the weak ones that cry for help. Help the prosecuted and the victim, because they are your friends. They're the comrades that fight and fall as your father and Bartolo fought and fell yesterday, for the conquest of the joy of freedom for all and the poor workers. In this struggle of life, you will find more love, and you will be loved. Rexroth's poem begins with a line from Rilke, Angst und Gestalt und Gebet, anguish and form and prayer. This is the last quarter of Rexroth's poem. Dante was homesick. The Chinese made an art of it. So was Ovid and many others, Pound and Eliot amongst them, Kropotkin dying of hunger, Berkman by his own hand, Fanny Baron biting her executioners, Manco in the Order of Calumny, Trotsky too, I suppose, passionately, after his fashion. Do you remember? What is it all for, this poetry, this bundle of accomplishment put together with so much pain? Do you remember the corpse in the basement? What are we doing at the turn of our years, writers and readers of the liberal weeklies? That's Kenneth Rexroth from his poem, August 22nd, 1939, in memory of Sacco and Vanzetti. You're watching News from Neptune, the writers and readers of the liberal weeklies edition. And we'll start with a writer in the Conservative Daily, David Green.
Thanks, Carl. Speaking of the Conservative Daily, my few remarks today partly stem from a phrase that was coined by one of the editors, Jim Dye, in a column yesterday, Thursday, in which he was talking about the brouhaha over the premature firing of an incoming faculty member and the resistance to that by some other local faculty members, mainly those who are identified with the College Faculty Association at the U of I. And the phrase that Jim Dye coined in criticizing the people is that they're feeling good about feeling bad. And I kind of just wanted to, it's a kind of curious phrase, as if people want to feel bad, that people on the left somehow enjoy when things are wrong, enjoy when things are going wrong in Gaza or here or wherever things are going wrong, and we want to feel good about complaining, about having something to complain about, something to protest about. It coincided yesterday with the publication in the New York Times of an editorial by a woman who I mentioned last week, I believe, on News from Neptune, Deborah Lipstadt, who is worried about anti-Semitism in Europe in the wake of protests against what Israel is doing in Gaza and American support for what Israel is doing in Gaza. And it was, in a certain way, a sort of timely reminder of what the capabilities are of those who defend Israel's behavior and our country's support for that behavior are willing to do to distract our attention from what is going on over there, no less what is going on in Ferguson and other places where apparently people on the left just want to feel good about feeling bad. There's certainly a lot to feel good. If there's a lot to feel, if the point is to feel good, there certainly is a lot to feel bad about at this juncture in history when when there's this sort of bubbling up of state violence going on, and bubbling up of the connections that are being made between violence and the militarization of police in places like Ferguson, as well as what's going on in Gaza, which has always been kind of a laboratory for the surveillance and control and militarization of an occupied territory. But I would also add to that in this morning's New York Times, which is sort of a preview of the Sunday opinion section, there's a very interesting and somewhat surprising article by a British Jew named Anthony Lerman, who has for quite some time been quite critical of the manner in which Israel occupies the Palestinians and treats them, and he's basically calling, as many other people have recently, for an end to the notion of such thing as a liberal Zionism, as a kind of the increasingly oxymoronic meaning of liberalism in the context of a political view that purports to be enlightened, but it in fact is increasingly revealed as something that only lends itself to the continued domination of the Palestinians by Israel, and really in spite of the fact of some of the origins of Zionism being in a binational perspective and a cultural perspective, as seeing Israel or seeing Palestine as a Jewish homeland, it's increasingly clear that the vision that has dominated has been a much darker vision and a much more dominant vision of the Palestinian, of Israel's control, expulsion and occupation and control of the Palestinian people. So I would recommend, if you have access to the New York Times, perhaps to read both those pieces and contrast those pieces. The Lipstadt piece is, in evoking, and is pretty standard in invoking anti-Semitism, and the Lerman piece hopefully at least certifies in mainstream media a somewhat expanding the limits of allowable debate in terms of the Israel-Palestine question and how it relates to Jews in particular. And certainly I think this has been an evolving process for the last 10, 15, 20 years, and I've seen a lot of changes, even the way that it's being discussed around here, although the fact that we cannot, that the university will not be able to hire, apparently not be able to hire a faculty member who would be able to continue that process, I think is something that we should be concerned about, but we should carry on locally, nevertheless to speak truthfully and rationally about what's going on over there and its relation to all the global issues that we talk about on this program.
Thank you, David. You were watching News from Neptune. Karen, a reaction to David's comments?
This is trivial, but in comparison to what David has just said, on the firing of someone before they've actually begun their job as a recruiter, an international recruiter, I find that specifically reprehensible, because the person is left in limbo, as they say. They've already quit their job, but they haven't even had a chance to prove themselves at their new job, and often they can't go back. So they're left unemployed, literally. It's in my field, it's considered reprehensible, and it's often what people do when they actually want to destroy someone. And I've seen a company do this when their competition was so great that they went after the top marketing salesperson, director, and hired them, and then immediately fired them so that that person could no longer compete with their company. In this case, it's not about competition.
Point, yeah.
It's not about competition, but maybe it's just about, let's shut this guy up. Maybe I know that's a bit of a stretch, but shut him up. Because how do you really shut someone up? Actually, you unemploy them, you oppress them, you impoverish them. That is what I see happening. I mean, we know the greatest way of threatening people is, threat, that's not the word I want to use, of oppressing people and shutting them up is, well, to bomb them. You kill them, okay? Which is what we see happening in Gaza. But of course you will create others that will come and fight their battle for them. But that is, it was seen in Asia as a tactic. And I addressed it as such with a client when that happened, that it was considered to be so reprehensible that they had to make it good. And I was fortunate I was able to convince someone to do that. So it was just my thinking. at the time.
It's a subtle and interesting point, and that I think, I mean, we decry the university being corporatized, which is something that actually runs back a good century, probably, but it certainly has been in this age of neoliberalism, corporatized in ways that really would have been surprising even at the time of the Vietnam War. But that's a very subtle point that I think may, in fact, I hadn't heard before, but it's a good one, Karen, that may have something to do, particularly with this case at the University of Illinois, given that the contretemps between Salaita and his principal tormentor at the University of Illinois, Carrie Nelson, has a back history, has a backstory. Goes back to at least the arguments about the American Studies Association and the attempt to establish an academic boycott of Israel, which Carrie talked about even on Democracy Now! When that occurred. So the notion that this was an estoppage, so to speak, of Salaita, I don't think's out of the question at all.
Well, I want to make it clear, I'm not even speculating.
Yeah, no, I think that it's an important point.
I know nothing about hiring practices within academia, but as a recruiter
Neither do I.
as a recruiter in the commercial arena for many years internationally, I know that this was considered an especially reprehensible tactic to.
Having been fired from three interesting universities in my my somewhat checkered academic career, I'm interested in this. But the much more serious point is the fact that, look, universities are supposed to operate on principles of academic freedom. Right. Academic freedom means that people are not hired and fired based on the content of what they say.
Right.
That couldn't be more basic in the mythology about universities. In fact, as anyone who's spent any time in universities knows how it is done and knows how people are excluded for not having the right views or not being down with the current orthodoxy, especially in the ideological disciplines like history and political science, sociology, and so forth. But even in disciplines further removed from that, such as English, which in its own way is at least as ideological. But I think that this case is particularly embarrassing because it's such an egregious violation of the principles of academic freedom. And the idea that incivility somehow cancels one's ability to take advantage of those traditions is laughable.
Yeah. I kind of sense that what we have in the local media is a kind of a lockdown. There's just a strange phenomenon in really following the newspaper and following what's being said in the comment sections and on campus, and of course school's just getting started, and the daily Illini hasn't been being published, I assume, in the last. I'm not sure how it's being published these days, whether it's still in hard copy or online, but I don't have high expectations in terms of this issue being covered. But it's just there's seems to be kind of a lockdown in the fact that the campus administrators aren't saying anything. And there really isn't much to go on. Nobody's saying anything, excuse me, except in the comment section of these newspaper articles. They haven't really published very many letters. It looks like the editorial page of the News Gazette is being strictly limited in various ways. It appears to me that there's been an editorial decision made to publish fewer reader letters and more columns and more, a big cartoon, and there isn't much room left on the page for anybody like me who actually wants to say anything, and I think that's really noticeable. I get the sense that there was a concern that there was too much debate breaking out, that there was too many opinions being said, and I probably shouldn't bite the hand that to a certain extent has fed me, but there's really seemed like a lot of pushback when it comes, and even in terms of the coverage of the news. What we're seeing on the front page is the coverage of local stories and, pretty relatively trivial local stories, and we're seeing the coverage
Except demonstrations.
We're seeing the coverage of what's going on in Ferguson and what's going on in Gaza, relegated to the third page, or in some days not being reported at all, and being reported in this kind of balanced way. I mean, there's really no outlet to reflect the outrage that is going on in the non-mainstream media and the alternative media. The kind of crisis, the sort of the really connecting the dots and the points to the crisis going on in these various ways is the local media's. I get the feeling they're kind of waiting till it's over. Just sort of hopefully school will start and this will all be over and those things will settle down at Missouri and that'll be over, and what's going to happen with this cop and what's going to happen with the New York City case, and there's just all this stuff going on, and hopefully something will happen when something does happen that they just kind of jump on, like the horrible beheading of this photojournalist in Syria, then they jump on that because to them the moral lines are more clear there. They can not talk so much about where ISIS really came from and how that connects to what's going on all over the Middle East and all over this country.
Since that's also the strategy of our chief magistrate, they're in what they would think of as good company, right?
Yeah.
Something's going on at the university today. Our colleague Karen Evans-Levy posted on Facebook that many of the activities on campus are being taken off campus, and it's related to the firing of Stephen Saleta. So I thought, maybe there are demonstrators out there that so I don't know. I just caught a glimpse of that before I left.
On the question, too, of the News Gazette, David, it seems to me that it's important to realize that the News Gazette's hands are hardly clean on these really outrageous cases of violations of academic freedom in recent days. They have really been leaders as much as reporters on the Kilgore case and the Saleta case. They've stoked the fires, suggesting that there are community interests behind that particular fire stoking. But nevertheless, the News Gazette has been in the forefront on that. Including their excellent cold case reporter Jim Dye. So they have some explaining to do, at least, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that a lot of people are asking themselves, or should be asking themselves if they're not, who are we in bed with these days? I mean, liberal, you have a university administration that is, on the one hand, scorned as a part of the problem of government and the expenses, and they're writing articles appropriate articles about how much the incoming president of the university will have to be paid.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have people like Carrie Nelson in bed with people like Jim Dye over this. I don't want to evoke that image too vividly on family television, but I mean, they could be fully dressed for all we know. It's analogous, I think, to a way that a lot of people are feeling about what's going on in Israel and Gaza at this time. It's like, what sort of philosophy among liberal Jews, and of course Norman Finkelstein has been pointing this out for years in what he talks about the end of the love affair between liberal Jews in this country and Israel and Zionism. But the question is, what does it feel like when people like we're supposed to identify as Jews and as liberals and as enlightened people with people like Netanyahu and other aspects of this, and I see a lot of I'm sensing in the background a lot of people considering these things in their minds as school gets up and the Saleta case will be resolved one way or the other. I see hopefully some I'm hoping maybe wishful thinking that there is some coming out about to be happening. There's some people coming out and looking at these things and saying, this is what we're getting for having supported some of these policies or having not spoken out against some of these policies that will not be changed, except they won't be changed unless people actually organize to change them.
That's absolutely true. On the university question, there are a couple of clouds on the horizon this morning. In general, first of all, we know that the former head of the Department of Homeland Security, which after all is behind the what's being talked about in the liberal journals as police militarization, and that this is a conscious and direct policy of the Obama administration, fearing domestic unrest in opposition to its economic and military policies. Anyhow, the former head of the Department of Homeland Security became president of the Public University of California.
Right.
And this week it was announced that Admiral William H. McRaven, the head of the U.S. Special Forces Command, that's basically the American death squads active in 130 countries around the world, Admiral McRaven will take over as Chancellor of the Public University of Texas system. Upon taking office, McRaven will instantly become one of the highest paid public university system leaders in the country. According to system officials, McRaven's annual salary will be $1.2 million. Additionally, $400,000 in deferred compensation will be set aside each year. He will be eligible for up to $300,000 of bonuses each year. It depends upon how many points he scores, I think, but and will receive a one-time payment of $300,000 to help with his move to Austin. I mean, you know how tough it is to move to Austin.
Yeah.
300K should maybe cover it for him.
300, yeah, no, trust me, I've been in that field. And you're lucky if they give you like 5,000 or 10,000 to move from up north to the south.
And he also will get annual bonuses, apparently, for his necessary work as head of the University of Texas. So, you know, killing people around the world, rendition, torture, and so forth, seems to be a good background for becoming head of a university.
Head of
and maybe we
academia.
can understand something more about, you know, what universities are doing, at least metaphorically, to their own people. It's not a bright day.
Unbelievable. And,
Yeah.
and the fees that they're receiving at these universities where the people that go to get an education are becoming totally impoverished and indebted. And of course, professors, I mean, gee whiz, adjunct professors are taking over, and what are they being paid? They're not even given health care benefits. I mean,
That's
it's
a very
just
good
so
point.
outrageous.
And we've talked here before about the debt trap for students as a conscious policy over the last
Yes.
generation to make sure that you don't have the sort of outbursts you had in regard to Vietnam War in Southeast
Right.
Asia while war is going on in Southwest Asia. And it's been, you know, perfectly successful for the most part across American
Right,
universities.
another method of shutting people up.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
All of the things we talk about in this program relate to each other.
Everything's
So
related.
The Ferguson, Missouri case
Too true.
relates to the society at
Yes.
large. It relates to the issues we're talking about in terms of higher ed. It may seem distant, but
But it's not.
there's a
It's-
lot of tension. There's a
Yeah.
lot of class and race tension involved in there. And the question is, we look to more blatant examples to spark things. It isn't that we wanted anybody to get killed, of course, but those are the kind of sparks that come from a place like Ferguson. The question is, what is the spark that's going to light the fire on college campuses in terms of what it is that's being faced by these students in terms of their futures and their debts? There always has to be a spark of some kind and an opportunity for consciousness raising in regard to these things.
When I was but a youth and first involved with American universities, there was a semi-mythical organization called Students for a Democratic Society that began basically as an anarchist operation. I mean, almost what we would call a libertarian operation these days.
Yeah.
as the group developed through the 1960s, a good deal of intellectual work was done trying to break through the carapace of American propaganda from what might be from the golden age of capitalism after the Second World War, and as the group. And these were kids, after all. These were students. As this group went on, it was at one point, I recall, taken as a revelation, as an insight, as a brilliant bit of apperception of what was really going on. The mantra, quote, "Everything is connected," close quote. Talking about exactly the connection we're talking about. It was a worthwhile discovery, and it's also worthwhile when we think about national policy today as the government tries to downplay those connections or suggest there aren't any real connections between their economic policies and their military policy. There's not any real connection between what they're doing in Europe and what they're doing in Asia. There's no real connection between war in the Middle East and poverty at home. But in fact, there are. Everything is connected. The kids of the 1960s were right.
They were.
You're watching News from Neptune, where every now and then we try to chase some of these connections and talk about them. There's one I was reminded of by David's discussion of the New York Times and anti-Semitism. On the anti-Semitism front this week, there was quite a remarkable story coming out of the online magazine, I suppose you would call it Common Dreams. Common Dreams has for a long time published very good articles from various places, I mean, on political matters, often foreign policy, but domestic policy as well. This week it was revealed that a long series of comments posted to articles at Common Dreams that were viciously anti-Semitic and scornful of the international Jewish conspiracy that was responsible for all our problems, that those comments which were so bitter and so vicious that even some contributors to Common Dreams pulled out of their contributions or withdrew their contributions on the grounds that Common Dreams shouldn't be publishing this terrible anti-Semitic garbage, even as comments on articles. Well, it was revealed this week that the comments came from a Jewish graduate student at Harvard who was immensely active in constructing what we might call a black advance. That is, this horrible anti-Semitic bile was constructed in order precisely to discredit groups like Common Dreams the people who posted on it. An amazing story, and it was the anonymity of the internet allowed that to happen, allowed him to pretend to be a variety of people commenting on Common Dreams statements. Interesting story, eh?
And people are actually paid to do that too. I had read once that certain books, if they tended to be leftist, that there were people who would just go in and do a quick review of some of these books, like at Amazon.com, and say it was really bad, it was trashy, or something to that effect, and they were paid to do that.
In the case of the Israeli massacres recently, we know that, I don't know whether the fellow at Common Dreams was connected or not, but the government of Israel has been running a campaign of Hasbara, propaganda on American websites in which Israeli students are incorporated by the Israeli government into an operation designed to do precisely this.
I feel like I feel like I told a joke without telling the punchline when I started with my comments, and what I wanted to say about Deborah Lipstadt in terms of her alarmism about anti-Semitism is that she's quote unquote feeling good about feeling bad.
Yes.
And there's so much about accusations of anti-Semitism that could be, accused of simply people wanting to feel good about feeling bad in the way that Jim Dye doesn't understand when he's accusing leftists of the same thing. But I think I would accuse, it's a more fundamental, profound issue of the way propaganda is being used and the
Right.
way anti-Semitism is being exploited by Deborah Lipstadt and many others. But I think the case, and what's interesting about the case in Common Dreams is that they are being quote unquote nice enough to not reveal the name of this character
Right.
because they're concerned about his safety. I have a feeling that eventually it will probably become known who this person is. You know, the way these things work on the internet is that somebody can probably figure out who this person is. I'm not saying that that should be done, but I'd kind of like to know who it is.
I was just
I don't want to hurt him though.
I was just going to say where we really should be concerned about anti-Semitism, but of course we aren't, is in Kiev with the government that we're propping up there to kill people throughout the Ukraine. And, I mean, we know that they are actual Nazis. I don't know if the term neo-Nazi or Nazi fits it, but somehow we don't seem to concern ourselves with that.
It's telling that Deborah Lipstadt isn't talking about that.
Right.
Okay, so
That's
I mean,
my- yes.
and that's absolutely
Right.
predictable that in the context of talking about protests in Europe over Gaza and whatever anti-Semitism might be involved, what Norman Finkelstein calls it best, sort of spillover among people who are just appalled when Zionism, when the actions of Israel are identified with Jews as a people. Then so I think that's, and what's going on in Ukraine insofar as there's anti-Semitism. I don't take it seriously as a virulent form of anti-Semitism directed at Jews, you know, in the same manner that it was in the 1930s. But still, it's fascinating and again predictable that it won't be pointed out in the mainstream propaganda because it doesn't advantage anyone who's in terms of promoting the coup.
Yes.
You know, to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought one of the stranger things in the New York Times this week, while we're talking about the organs of opinion that we are forced to deal with, was Paul Krugman's column, the first of the week. Monday of this week, Paul Krugman published a column that bought completely the whole cloth story that the Obama administration is telling about Russia and the, quote, invasion of Ukraine, close quote, Putin's machinations in Ukraine, completely swallowing what the U.S. government has been saying in its most extreme propaganda enterprise underway these days, perhaps, and being apparently, poor Paul, completely unaware of the counter story of American State Department construction of the coup in Ukraine and encouragement of the Kiev government's attack on the eastern provinces of Ukraine as being the source of as many people apparently who been killed as have been killed in Gaza. Now this is an important story, a vital story, and a story in which the leading liberal columnists in the New York Times is completely at sea. I can't ascribe it to anything more than ignorance. He can't be consciously buying a story he knows to be false, but the U.S. government is putting forth a story it knows to be false, and Paul's bought it.
And you should see CNN. Oh my God! Yesterday, Chuck Hagel.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, we should all be fearful. And here again, it's the Islamophobia because of ISIS. I mean, we're in such danger over ISIS and all the sleeper cells that exist within the U.S. and all the people who are joining ISIS in northern Iraq from the U.K. and from Europe and from the U.S. Not as many from the U.S. And they used the killing of this young photojournalist as their reason why. Of course, now we're going to have to attack Syria. So here we go, more war. But it's so. I can't tell you between that and Ferguson, it's beyond belief. I mean, I'm surprised that more Americans aren't out just buying more guns and putting bars on their doors and their windows,
What makes you
because
think
the
they are?
feeling they probably are. Yeah, they probably are.
Yeah.
Which, if you go back to the Sacco Vanzetti, I was rather amused when you mentioned that they were arrested and had to explain why they happened to have guns on them. And I thought, today you almost have to explain why you don't carry a gun. Maybe they would have been saved if the NRA had been as popular and successful in their propaganda spiel back then.
You're watching news from Neptune. We have a number of themes on the table here that I think we need to talk about. One of the things that I keep coming back to is the remarkable surprise that overtakes me each week as I read stories that you'd think I'd be smart enough to expect after many years of doing this sort of work. But the one that goes into that file, another one that goes into that file for me for this week, is the reactions of the administration's leadership to the rise of the Islamic State or the Caliphate, call it as you will, in Southwest Asia. Remember when all the good liberals were telling us how important it was to get Chuck Hagel in as defense secretary, because after all, this would allow Obama to do what he really wanted to do anyhow, which was withdraw from the wars and pull it out, and
Right.
try to ignore those 200 dead children and from the drone strikes that the president was striking. After all, if he had a liberal defense secretary, all of this would probably go away. This week we heard the Liberal Defense Secretary and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff both say that the Islamic State group in the Middle East is outrageously dangerous, far more dangerous than anything we've faced in the Middle East. Don't speak to me about weapons of mass destruction. That was then, this is now. This is really dangerous, and we're really going to have to do something about it. And gosh, don't. We can't
Right.
we can't ignore this. This is really important.
Yeah.
At the same time, these same people are saying similar saber-rattling things about Eastern Europe, about Ukraine. Now, what's going on here? I mean, it's clear what Americans actually voted for in 2008 and 2012 when they elected Obama. They voted for an end of the wars, and they voted for a revival of the economy, an end of the recession. What they got from Obama, and continue to get to this day, is a continuation and expansion of the wars, and no action except window dressing on the economy that leaves Americans, in fact, the vast majority of Americans, in far worse shape economically than they were in 2008 when Obama was elected. Now, that's a situation that has to be mystified. It has to be covered over in some ways by our explainer-in-chief, and that's his job. That's what he's doing. But so when cracks appear in the facade, when we hear the Liberal Defense Secretary and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff suggest that more and more war is imminent, we should take it seriously, because their job is to cover sin with smooth names, right?
But don't you believe Obama that when he says that what we're about in this country is protecting the lives of our citizens in other countries?
Right.
That that's the first and foremost thing that he's concerned about, that he falls back on. So yeah, that's a sarcastic comment on
Yes, well, and in fact, that's quite appropriate. One question let me ask the both of you about this. The present demonization of the Islamic State, which is not a nice bunch of folks, even though they're horrible. Even if they all originally worked for Saudi Arabia, for the United States, and the United States' major ally in the region, Saudi Arabia. I mean, we have to remember in the modern history of jihadism that it was in fact formed by the United States. Jihadi, religious war, terrorism, as we call it, was constructed in the Carter administration when the U.S., in the largest CIA operation in history, and that's saying something given what the CIA has done, the largest CIA operation in history, the CIA got together the most extreme religious fanatics it could find in the Middle East, gave them weapons, and sent them into Afghanistan in order to, as the Carter administration said, give the Russians a Vietnam of their own. That was Zbigniew Brzezinski, Carter's national security advisor.
Yeah.
Now that was before the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, and the fact that the United States constructed jihadism 40 years ago led to some embarrassments, such as the blowback, as it was called, of 9/11/2001, where the jihadists that the U.S. has constructed struck, in fact, in New York. There were other blowbacks. Benghazi, which has been mystified in American political discourse, but is indeed an indicative example of what the U.S. is actually doing. Benghazi was a blowback as well, and the U.S. Finally may be facing the largest blowback of this policy in the Islamic State. So some clarity on what the U.S. is actually doing over against the accounts from the propagandist-in-chief is what's called for. That's what we need.
Can I turn to Cambodia?
Yes, let's turn to Cambodia. That's, I'm not sure it'll make us feel any better.
No,
but,
it won't. It won't. Not at all. And I want to do this because I was preparing today by having David, you loaned me this book to read, After the Cataclysm, Post-War Indochina and the Reconstruction of Imperial Ideology, written by Noam Chomsky and Edward S. Herman. And this was published 1979, yes.
Right. About the time we were constructing jihadism.
Right. But and so we have to dedicate this program to Noam Chomsky, and it's not difficult to do.
Right.
And I did read it, and you're right. It's filled with a lot of detailed documents, primarily. Mm-hmm. I was out protesting in the streets of D.C. against the bombing of Cambodia, and so when I moved to Thailand, Cambodia was always somehow up there in my mind. I took a strong interest, in what was happening there.
You probably have to explain for those who came in late what you mean by the bombing of Cambodia.
Well, yes, I plan to do that. That was in the early 70s. The U.S. was bombing Cambodia. The excuse at the time, I believe, was that, well, they were actually going after Vietnam. It was actually secret at the time. It was a secret.
Not secret for the Cambodians.
It was a secret bombing that, but when many of us, primarily on the left in the U.S., I was a student in D.C. at the time, found out, we did go out in the streets and protest against it. And it was definitely, we were under the impression that it started because, and the excuse at the time by our government was that, well, these Vietnamese, they keep hiding over in Cambodian territory. And then, of course, I want to skip to 1975 when Vietnam fell, and then I was also aware of the Maya Gay affair, whereby some of at that time they were called the Democratic Kampuchea. The Khmer Rouge were able to take over government in Cambodia as a result of the bombing and the destruction and a lot of other things that were happening. The Khmer Rouge actually came into power. Many people have seen the film The Killing Fields, as did I later on. What I really want to get to, though, is that the genocide that was so promoted, that the Khmer Rouge were committing against their own people. And for years and years, I was in Cambodia in '98. I've been to the Museum of Horror and Torture, Tol Slang. I've seen the skulls. And in driving around in Siem Reap area where Angkor Wat is, where you had to have, you could not go on your own. You had to have a driver or someone. This was pre-elections. The Khmer Rouge were supposedly still around. The thing is, there was always one question uppermost in my mind. that I never dared to ask. Why would they kill their own people in this way? Why did they do this? All that was promoted, and I know it was promoted in the U.S. because I actually had a couple friends when I returned to the U.S. over time saying, oh, do you live near where all those people were being killed and having their heads cut off? And I thought it was interesting because these are people who had no interest in the news, had no interest in current affairs, and didn't even know where I was, except that I was someplace located near Cambodia. So I knew that there was some kind of propaganda mill going on in the U.S. But I never dared ask the question, why? And what I liked about this book was, in the prelude, I hadn't even gotten through the preface, and that's where he asks the question, why? Why did this happen? And there's no doubt in my mind, after reading all of the documents, that it wasn't. You know, we just had a trial. Ku Sampen and I forget the name of the other gentleman were just tried. I mean, they're probably pushing 90 and were found guilty of crimes against humanity. That the real question was never really asked. Now, I'm familiar with Michael Vickery, who was the historian who really knew Cambodian history at the time. And I remember being at the Foreign Correspondents Club and discussion took place, but I wasn't getting it. Clearly, I wasn't getting it. He goes back to document a lot of the information related to what the culture of the people and what took place. I've come out of this book clearly. I'm not saying that atrocities did not happen. I'm not saying that they weren't committed. There's no doubt that they were committed. We have enough documented proof. But why is still a major question. Once you, and I think here is a comment here in something Noam Chomsky during an interview in 2009 has said, he said that the worst crime, okay, to him, one of the worst crimes against humanity was by Kissinger and Nixon. He said, and he said, they released, Ben Kiernan, also an historian on Cambodia, genocide in general, he released the documents during the Clinton years regarding the conclusion. These were Air Force documents about bombings that took place at the time. And he said their conclusion was that this bombing, which really had genocidal intent, bombing by the U.S., okay, anything that flies against anything that moves, essentially changed the Khmer Rouge from a small group into a mass army of what they call enraged peasants bent on revenge. So, I mean, there are so many reasons, but I really came out of this feeling like everything I thought I knew was wrong. And now I know the truth, even if I can't explain it carefully. I'm not explaining myself very well. Maybe David, you could take over.
For
on
me,
this.
it was just it was just a matter of filling in
What
the
you already
gaps,
knew.
so the more specific gap. Well, no, I mean that what was going on in the early '70s with the bombing. It's as if history started in Cambodia in April '75 when the Khmer Rouge took over. Except everybody knew at the time that bombing had been going on, and everybody knew that we had overthrown the government there and placed in our own puppet, a guy named Lon Nol. And we didn't know all the details, but it's as if the movie The Killing Fields came out and the history started the day in Cambodia, the day the Khmer Rouge went into Phnom Penh and started bringing people back from the city, expelling them into the countryside. And so it was the beginning and the part of the process by which we forget or prevent remembering what the origins of the Cambodian killing fields were.
And 2 points I think that really need to be made. One is that as of 2009, we dropped more bombs. The U.S., dropped more bombs on Cambodia than on any other nation ever, as of 2009. I mean, so the documents prove that we were lied to about how the bombing actually took place and how many bombs were actually dropped. The second thing I think that's important is that when the Khmer Rouge were sending people from the urban centers into the countryside, okay, when you view that film, for instance, and I've read the book, but the film, I saw the film first, so it's fresh in my mind. You get the impression they're doing it as a form of punishment, you know, to take the well-to-do out of the cities. And this is what's always promoted as this is what communists and socialists do. No, they were trying to prevent starvation. Because after the bombing, animals were killed, fields were destroyed, people were dying. They had to do something to prevent the people from starving, and they were successful. That's what's almost little known here in the U.S. today. That
and this story, like so many of about American foreign policy, has gone down the memory hole, and it's our job here to remind you to look at these things, because the story hasn't gone away. You've been watching News from Neptune for the 34th week of 2014, and I'm at the end of my notes here. I have a question that I wanted to pose to my colleagues, and I'll pose it to you too. Why hasn't the Islamic State, the Caliphate group, why hasn't the Islamic State said anything about Israel's massacre in Gaza?
yeah, exactly.
Why has that not been mentioned? Now, to answer that question, I think you need to unpack some of the things that are going on in the Middle East, and more importantly, some of the obfuscation that's going on by the American government over what's going on in the Middle East. But I was interested that the question was raised in a roundabout way at the end of the week when we began to get a propaganda line from the U.S. and Israel that Hamas is IS. Hamas, the ruling group in Gaza, is the Islamic State. The Islamic State is Hamas. Now, this is demonstrably false, but this is what the U.S. and Israel are suddenly saying. To give an explanation of why the U.S. is saying that and why it isn't true is to learn something, it seems to me, about the wars that the U.S. is conducting around the world. But we'll have to leave that for next time. You've been watching News from Neptune, the writers and readers of the Liberal Weeklies edition. My discussants have been Karen Aram and David Green. I'm Carl Estabrook. Our thanks to UPTV, especially Jake and Jason. Upcoming programs here on UPTV include Labor's Worldview, Sunday at 4 p.m., conducted by Neptuner David Johnson, Progressive Voices, Monday from 3 to 5 p.m., and on WRFU Radio, Living Simply, first Fridays of the month at 8 a.m. with Neptuner Ron Zoke. Inshallah, we'll be back next week with a new edition of News from Neptune to remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere, what's past is prologue, what to come in yours and my discharge. In the meantime, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.